My wife cheated on me and admitted that she had a son, but after 6 years, she came back to me and asked for help. I never thought I'd be writing something like this, but I need to get this off my chest. My name is Alex, and I was engaged to Sarah. We had been together for 9 years, nearly a decade of my life spent loving this woman, believing in us, and thinking we were building something that would last forever. But everything fell apart in a way I never saw coming. Sarah and I met in college. She was smart, ambitious, and beautiful, and I fell for her almost instantly. We started dating during our sophomore year, and by the time we graduated, we had already discussed marriage. But life had other plans, and we decided to focus on our careers before tying the knot. Sarah got a job in corporate marketing, and I went into IT consulting. We moved in together, rented a nice apartment in the city, and everything seemed perfect. But if I had known what was coming, I might have thought twice about everything. I proposed to Sarah on our 9-year anniversary. It wasn't some grand, over-the-top moment. It was just us in our favorite little Italian restaurant, drinking wine and reminiscing about how far we had come. I pulled out the ring, something I had spent months saving for, and asked her to marry me. She cried. I cried. She said yes. The restaurant staff clapped, and we were both overwhelmed with happiness. That night, we made love like it was the first time all over again. I remember holding her afterwards, feeling like my life was finally falling into place. But good things don't last forever. About 3 months after our engagement, she called me in the middle of the day. Her voice was shaking. I got fired, she whispered. I was in the middle of a client meeting, but the second I heard those words, I excused myself and stepped outside. What happened? She hesitated. They're saying I violated company policy. I felt my stomach drop. What does that mean? I don't know, Alex. It's bullshit. She wouldn't tell me the details, just that she had been called into a meeting, told she was being let go immediately, and escorted out of the building like some kind of criminal. No severance. No warning. Nothing. When she got home, she was a mess. Her makeup was smudged from crying. Her hands were shaking, and she kept pacing the living room. I had never seen her so fragile before. I pulled her into my arms. We'll figure this out. I'll cover things until you find another job. She clung to me, sobbing into my chest. I could feel how much this broke her. Sarah had always been independent, always in control. Now, she wasn't. But there was something off about her story. Sarah spent the next few weeks pretending to job hunt. At first, I didn't think much of it. Getting fired was a huge blow, and I knew she needed time to recover. But then weeks turned into months, and she still hadn't landed anything. I was covering all the bills now. Rent, groceries, utilities, everything. And while I made decent money, it wasn't limitless. I started noticing small things that didn't add up. She would go out during the day but have no solid job leads. She would buy new clothes and makeup despite not having an income. She never wanted to talk about what happened at work. I asked her once, straight up, what company policy she had violated. She looked me dead in the eyes and said, "It doesn't matter." They were looking for an excuse. That answer didn't sit right with me. Sarah's mood swings became unbearable. Some days, she was loving and sweet, like the woman I had always known. Other days, she was cold, distant, and irritable. She started drinking more, nothing extreme at first, just a couple of glasses of wine at night. But then she started drinking earlier in the day. I'd come home from work and find her sitting on the couch, staring at the TV, a half-empty bottle next to her. I just needed to relax, she'd say, her voice slurred. I tried to be patient. I reminded myself that she was going through something devastating, but my patience had limits. One night, I came home to find her completely wasted. She had knocked over a glass of wine, staining the white carpet, and was crying uncontrollably. "I'm a failure," she sobbed. "You're not a failure, Sarah," I said, trying to clean up the mess. "You just need to get back on your feet." She grabbed my arm, her nails digging into my skin. What if I never do? I didn't know how to answer that. One afternoon, while she was in the shower, I decided to check her laptop. I knew it was wrong, but I was desperate for answers. Something wasn't adding up. I opened her email. At first, it was normal: job applications, rejection emails, newsletters. But then I found something that made my blood run cold. An email thread with a coworker, dated a week before she got fired. Subject: "We have a problem." The messages were cryptic, but from what I could piece together, Sarah had been involved in something shady at work. Something about taking the risk and making it worth it. The final email was from her coworker. They found out. "Don't contact me again." That was the day she lost her job. I sat there, staring at the screen, my heart pounding. She had lied to me. She hadn't been some innocent victim of corporate injustice. She had done something wrong. I shut the laptop just as I heard the water stop running. I put it back where I found it and sat on the couch, my mind racing. What had she done? And if she had lied about this, what else had she lied about? I started noticing the changes right after Sarah lost her job. She had been spiraling for months, drinking too much, barely trying to find work, and emotionally shutting me out. I was exhausted. I was doing everything I could to keep us afloat, while she seemed to be sinking deeper into whatever hole she had dug for herself. But then, out of nowhere, she found a new distraction. She signed up for a pottery class. It caught me off guard because Sarah had never once shown any interest in art, let alone getting her hands dirty with clay. She wasn't the type to sit still for hours molding something from scratch. But she told me she needed something therapeutic to help her get out of her funk, so I encouraged it. Maybe this would help her feel like herself again. At first, it seemed harmless. She'd come home in a better mood, talking about the pieces she was working on and the people she had met. I didn't mind. Hell, I was relieved to see her smiling again. But then she started mentioning one person in particular. Nick. She talked about him constantly. Nick said this. Nick did that. Nick's so funny. Nick's so talented. I figured he was just some guy in her class she had befriended, and I was happy she had someone to talk to. But then she started spending time with him outside of class. At first, it was little things. Grabbing coffee after class. Helping him pick out supplies for his next project. Harmless, right? I told myself she just needed a friend. Someone who wasn't me. Someone who didn't remind her of how much of a mess her life had become. But then she started canceling plans with me to spend time with him. I remember one Saturday night, I had made reservations at a steakhouse she had been wanting to try. I had planned everything. The wine, the table, even a little note in my pocket to remind her how much I loved her. But an hour before we were supposed to leave, she sent me a text. Hey babe, I totally forgot I promised Nick I'd help him with something tonight. Rain check? I just stared at my phone, feeling like an idiot. I wanted to be understanding. I really did. But something in my gut told me this wasn't just a friendship. That night, I didn't even bother eating the dinner I had planned. I sat in the dark, scrolling through social media, trying to distract myself. That's when I noticed something odd. Sarah had stopped posting pictures of us. She used to flood her Instagram with selfies of us together. Date nights, vacations, even random mornings in bed. But now, nothing. The last picture she had posted of us was 4 months ago, right before she lost her job. But guess who had started appearing on her profile? Nick. A picture of them in the studio, covered in clay, laughing. A selfie of them holding coffee cups with a caption, "Best study buddy ever." I felt sick. The next morning, I decided to say something. I didn't want to accuse her of anything, but I needed to know what was going on. Hey, I said over breakfast, keeping my voice casual. You've been spending a lot of time with Nick? She barely looked up from her coffee. Yeah, he's a great guy. Is he single? I asked. She smirked. Why? You jealous? I forced a laugh. Should I be? She rolled her eyes. Alex, come on. He's just a friend. He's actually been helping me a lot. You know, keeping me motivated. Motivated to do what? To be better. That word stung. Better? As if I hadn't been the one keeping our life together while she drowned in self-pity? She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. I know you're worried, but you don't have to be. Nick is just a good person. That's all. I wanted to believe her, but I didn't. Over the next few weeks, things got worse. She started staying out later. She started hiding her phone. She started acting like I was the one being unreasonable whenever I asked simple questions. One night, I decided to test something. I asked her what she was doing the next day, and she casually said she had class and then was grabbing lunch with some of her pottery friends. No big deal. Except I already knew there was no class that day. I had checked the schedule online. So, I followed her. I know. It was crazy. But at that point, I wasn't thinking straight. I was tired of the excuses. I was tired of being treated like I was paranoid. I needed to see the truth for myself. She left around noon, dressed a little too nicely for a casual lunch with friends. She got in her car and drove across town. Not to a cafe. Not to the pottery studio. To Nick's apartment. I parked down the street and watched as she rang his doorbell. A few seconds later, he opened the door, grinning like he had been waiting for her. She stepped inside. The door closed behind her. I sat in my car for 2 hours, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. She never came out. When she finally did, her hair was messy and her lipstick was smudged. She didn't see me. She got in her car, smiling to herself, and drove home like nothing had happened. I stayed parked in that spot for a long time, staring at Nick's door, my mind racing with every possibility. Was she cheating on me? Had she been lying to me this whole time? And if she had, how long had it been going on? I was supposed to be gone for another 3 days. The business trip had been scheduled for a full week, and I had even told Sarah I might stay longer if things went well. But I wrapped up early. The meetings finished ahead of schedule, and honestly, I just wanted to get home. I missed my own bed, my routine, and despite everything, I missed Sarah. I should have called ahead. I should have given her some kind of warning, but I didn't. I wanted to surprise her. The moment I stepped into the apartment, I knew something was off. The lights were dim. The air smelled like perfume. Not Sarah's usual scent, something different, heavier. And there was a faint sound coming from the bedroom. Muffled voices. A giggle. My heart started hammering. I walked down the hall slowly, every step feeling heavier than the last. I pushed open the bedroom door, and there they were, Sarah and Nick, in our bed. Time slowed. I felt like I had stepped into some kind of alternate reality, like my brain refused to process what my eyes were seeing. Sarah was half naked, the sheets barely covering her. Nick was sprawled beside her, his shirt on the floor, looking way too comfortable in my bed. It took them a second to notice me. When Sarah saw me, her face went pale. She yanked the blanket up to her chest, scrambling to sit up. Alex. Nick just lay there, blinking, as if his brain was still catching up. I don't know what snapped inside me first, but 1 second I was standing in the doorway, and the next, I was on top of him, my fists slamming into his face. I don't even remember throwing the first punch. I just remember the sound, the sickening crack of bone against bone. Nick's head snapped back, and he let out a strangled yell, but I didn't stop. I hit him again, and again. He tried to block me, but he wasn't fast enough. I had rage on my side. Sarah was screaming. She was pulling at me, clawing at my arms, trying to shove me off of him, but I barely felt it. Nick's nose was bleeding. His lip was split. I wanted to keep going. I wanted to destroy him, but Sarah's voice finally cut through the fog. Alex, stop. I froze. My breathing was ragged, my fists still clenched. Nick groaned beneath me, spitting blood onto my sheets. I turned to Sarah, my whole body shaking. How long? My voice barely sounded like my own. Tears welled in her eyes. Alex, please. How long? She hesitated, and that hesitation was enough. I staggered to my feet, wiping the sweat from my forehead. My hands were trembling, covered in his blood. My own brother. I turned to Nick. Get the fuck out of my house. He didn't move, so I grabbed his shirt off the floor and threw it in his face. I said get the fuck out. He sat up slowly, wincing. Man, just... I grabbed him by the collar, dragging him toward the door. He wasn't going to play the victim here. Sarah was crying, babbling something I wasn't even listening to. I threw open the front door and shoved him outside, slamming it behind him. Then I turned to Sarah. She stood there, wrapped in the blanket, her face streaked with tears. Alex, pack your shit. She blinked. What? You heard me. Alex, please, can we? Pack your shit. She didn't move. I stormed past her, grabbed a suitcase from the closet, and threw it onto the bed. I started grabbing her clothes, shoving them inside. Sarah rushed toward me, trying to grab my arm. Please, let's talk about this. I yanked my arm away. There's nothing to talk about. You fucked my brother. In my bed. There is nothing to say. She sobbed harder. I didn't mean for this to happen. I laughed. It was a cold, empty sound. Oh, really? You accidentally landed in bed with him? She shook her head. It wasn't like that. How was it, Sarah? Please, enlighten me. Was it the pottery classes? The late nights? The he's just a friend bullshit? I threw another handful of clothes into the suitcase. You were lying to me for months. She fell to her knees, hands covering her face. I didn't care. I zipped the suitcase and shoved it toward her. Get out. She didn't move. So I grabbed my phone and dialed the only number I could think of. My father picked up on the second ring. Hey, son. Dad. My voice shook. I need you to come over. Now. 15 minutes later, both my parents showed up. My father took one look at me, bruised knuckles, wild eyes, and knew something was very wrong. What happened? He asked, stepping inside. I didn't answer. I just pointed at Sarah. Ask her. Sarah was still sitting on the floor, looking pathetic. My mom rushed to her. Sweetheart, what's going on? My father turned back to me, his jaw tight. Alex. I exhaled, trying to keep my composure. She was sleeping with Nick. My father went still. My mother gasped. Wait, what? My father's hands curled into fists. Where is he? I kicked him out. Dad nodded, his face dark. Good. My mother, on the other hand, looked horrified. She turned to Sarah. Is this true? Sarah sobbed harder. My mother swallowed. Honey, I'm sure there's an explanation. An explanation? My voice was sharp. What possible explanation is there? My mother bit her lip. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe they were both hurting. I barked out a laugh. Are you actually defending him? She hesitated. He's still your brother. I turned to my father. Dad. His jaw was clenched. Nick is dead to me. My mother let out a small gasp. John. No, my father's voice was firm. He crossed a line, and you know it. He looked at Sarah with pure disgust. Get out. Sarah whimpered. My father's voice was steel. Now. Sarah finally moved. She grabbed the suitcase and stood up, her shoulders slumped. She turned to me one last time. I'm sorry. I stared at her, my face blank. I don't care. She walked out. The moment the door shut behind her, I felt the weight of everything crash down on me. My father put a hand on my shoulder. You did the right thing, but it didn't feel like it. It just felt like the end of everything. I thought I had seen the worst of it. I thought walking in on my fiancée in bed with my own brother, beating the shit out of him, and throwing her out of my house was the lowest point my life could hit. But I was wrong. A few weeks after it all went down, after I had spent night after night drowning in whiskey and regret, Sarah texted me. We need to talk. Please. My first instinct was to delete the message. Block her number. Pretend she had never existed. But some sick part of me needed to hear whatever bullshit excuse she had come up with this time. I wanted to hear her say it out loud. I wanted her to see my face when I told her to go to hell. I agreed to meet her at a cafe across town, somewhere neutral, somewhere that didn't carry the weight of our memories. I walked in expecting lies, excuses, maybe even a pathetic attempt to get me back. But I wasn't ready for what she actually told me. She was already there when I arrived, sitting at a small corner table, fidgeting with the hem of her sleeve. She looked tired, pale. I almost didn't recognize her. I sat down across from her, arms crossed. Say what you need to say. She took a shaky breath. I didn't want you to hear this from someone else. Something in her voice made my stomach clench. Hear what? She finally met my eyes. I'm pregnant, Alex. I felt like the air had been knocked out of my lungs. I stared at her, my mind scrambling to make sense of what I had just heard. I opened my mouth, but the words got stuck in my throat. Finally, I forced them out. Is it? She looked down. It's Nick's. The world blurred. Everything inside me went numb. My ears rang, my vision tunneled. My hands curled into fists under the table. I had braced myself for a lot of things, but not this. Not this. We didn't plan this, she said quickly, as if that was supposed to make a fucking difference. It just happened. I let out a short, bitter laugh. Yeah, I bet it just happened. We're keeping the baby. I stood up so fast the chair scraped against the floor. I'm done. She reached for my hand, but I pulled away like she was something toxic. Alex, please. You didn't need to tell me this, I said, my voice dangerously calm. This wasn't for me. This was for you. To clear your conscience. But I don't give a shit, Sarah. I don't care what happens to you, or Nick, or that baby. We are done. Do you understand me? You don't exist to me anymore. Tears welled in her eyes. Please, don't be like this. I leaned down, lowering my voice to something cold, final. Have a nice life, Sarah. And I walked out. I barely made it to my car before my hands started shaking. My vision blurred, and for the first time since this whole nightmare started, I felt like I was actually about to break. A week later, my mother called. I ignored it. 3 times. But on the 4th, I picked up. We need to talk, she said. I exhaled sharply. I don't think we do. It's about Nick and Sarah. Of course it was. They're getting married, she said, her voice hesitant. The words hit like a dull knife to the chest. I should have expected it. A pregnancy? Of course, they'd try to make it work. But hearing it out loud made me feel sick. And you support this? I asked. There was a pause. They made a mistake, Alex. But I hung up. I called my dad that night. I'm leaving. He didn't ask why. He didn't try to talk me out of it. He just asked, where are you going? Somewhere far, I muttered. As far as I can get from this fucking disaster. 3 weeks later, I packed my life into 2 suitcases, quit my job, and got on a plane. 3,500 kilometers away. A new city, A fresh start, no family, no reminders. The only person I kept in touch with was my father. He understood. He supported me. He never forgave Nick for what he did. The night before I left, I got one last text from my mother. You'll regret shutting us out. One day, you'll see that family is more important than pride. I didn't respond. I had no family anymore. It had been 6 years since I last saw her. 6 years since I had walked out of that cafe, leaving her behind with the mess she had made. 6 years since I had packed up my life and put 3,500 kilometers between me and the wreckage of my so-called family. 6 years since I had spoken to my mother, since I had heard my brother's name without a bitter taste filling my mouth. I had built a new life for myself, a quiet life, a better life. Then, one rainy evening, someone knocked on my door. I wasn't expecting anyone. I lived alone in a modest apartment, kept to myself, didn't make many friends. I liked it that way. So when I opened the door, I was already annoyed, ready to tell whoever it was that they had the wrong place. And then I saw her, Sarah, soaked from the rain, clutching a little girl's hand, looking at me with desperate, pleading eyes. I couldn't speak. My body went rigid, my breath caught in my throat. I stared at her, my mind barely processing the sight. The little girl, her daughter, stood silently beside her, big green eyes staring up at me. She looked so much like Nick. It made my stomach turn. For a long moment, no one said anything. The rain pounded against the pavement behind her, and the cold air crept in through the doorway. Then Sarah swallowed hard and whispered, "Alex, please." I should have slammed the door in her face. I should have told her to go to hell. But instead, I stepped aside. I still don't know why. Maybe it was morbid curiosity. Maybe I wanted to see how bad things had gotten for her. Maybe I just wanted to look her in the eyes one last time and tell her exactly what I thought of her. She walked in hesitantly, glancing around like she wasn't sure she was welcome. She wasn't. The little girl stayed close to her, gripping her coat sleeve. She was probably 5, maybe 6. Just old enough to understand tension, but not old enough to know why it was there. I closed the door and turned to face her. "Say whatever the hell you came to say." She flinched at my tone but nodded. "Nick left us." I scoffed. "Took him long enough." She blinked rapidly, like she was trying to keep herself together. "He cheated on me. 4 years, apparently. He finally just walked out. Said he was done. He doesn't even care about Emmy." She placed a hand on the little girl's head. "He won't answer my calls. He won't send money. Nothing." I crossed my arms. "So?" Her lower lip trembled. I didn't know where else to go. I laughed. Actually laughed. A sharp, bitter sound that felt like poison leaving my body. "You didn't know where else to go?" I repeated, shaking my head. "That's rich, Sarah. Really? What did you expect? That I'd take you in? That I'd help you?" She swallowed hard. I don't know. Her voice broke. "I don't have anyone. I didn't say anything. I didn't care. I didn't owe her a single fucking thing." She wiped at her eyes and motioned to the little girl. Can we sit down for a minute? Please." I stared at them. Emmy looked scared. Small. Her whole world was crumbling, and she had no idea why. I let out a slow breath and muttered, "5 minutes." I walked into the kitchen and pulled a chair out, watching as Sarah sat across from me. Emmy climbed onto the seat next to her, swinging her little legs. "I just need some help," Sarah said softly. "Just until I can figure things out." I tilted my head. "And you thought I was the person to ask?" "I didn't think," she exhaled shakily. "I don't know. My mother's gone. Nick's family won't speak to me. I have no money, no job, nowhere to go." I leaned forward, my voice low and dangerous. "You had somewhere to go 6 years ago. You had a home, a life. You threw it all away for him. And now you want me to pretend none of that happened?" She shook her head quickly. "No, I cut her off. "I don't care, Sarah. About you. About Nick. About your fucked up situation. You made your bed, and now you get to lie in it." Tears welled in her eyes. "Please, Alex." "Why should I?" I snapped. She swallowed hard and hesitated before saying the one thing that made my blood boil. "My mother said you would." Silence. Cold, suffocating silence. I clenched my jaw so tightly it hurt. "Excuse me?" She hesitated. She said you'd do the right thing. That you wouldn't let us suffer. That you'd take responsibility. I laughed again, but this time, it was dark and humorless. "Take responsibility?" I whispered, eyes narrowing. "For what? For your choices? For your kid?" I scoffed. "That's not my responsibility. That's Nick's. You remember him, right? The guy you betrayed me for? The one you married? She let out a choked sob. I know. I know I hurt you. I know I don't deserve anything from you. But Emmy, she looked at the little girl, her voice breaking. She didn't do anything wrong. I looked at the kid again. She stared down at her hands, kicking her feet nervously. A wave of something hit me, but I shoved it away. I turned back to Sarah. Get out. She sucked in a breath. Alex, please. I said get out. She let out a broken sound, but she knew better than to push me. She stood up slowly, wiping her face. She reached for Emmy's hand, and the little girl slid off the chair. I watched as they walked to the door. Sarah turned one last time. I'm sorry. I didn't say a word. She stepped outside, and I slammed the door shut behind her. Then I sat down at the table and stared at the wall, my hands clenched into fists. It took everything in me not to destroy something. I never thought I'd hear from her again. Not after 6 years. Not after everything that happened. But a few nights ago, I opened my door, and there she was. Sarah, standing in the rain, holding a little girl's hand, looking at me like I was her last hope. For a second, I just stared at her, my brain refusing to process the moment. She looked different, older, tired, worn out in a way I couldn't explain. And the kid? She was small, maybe 5 or 6, and the second I looked at her, I knew. She had his eyes, his face. There was no doubt. I should have slammed the door, should have told her to fuck off then and there. But I didn't. I stepped aside, let her in, let the past walk straight into my living room like it had every right to be there. She sat down on my couch, gripping the little girl's hand like she was afraid I'd kick them both back out. And honestly, I should have. She didn't waste time getting to the point. Nick left her. Just walked out one day. No warning. No explanation. Just disappeared. She found out later he had been cheating for years, probably even while they were still married. And now? He wasn't answering her calls. He didn't want to see the kid. Didn't care that they had nowhere to go. And for some reason, she thought I would. I laughed. Right in her face. You're kidding, right? I said. You actually think I give a shit about your problems? Her eyes welled up, and I could feel the anger bubbling under my skin. Because fuck her. Fuck her and her tears. I owed her nothing. She said she didn't know where else to go. That my mother told her I would help. That I would do the right thing. That was the final nail in the coffin. I stood up, went to my desk, grabbed an envelope, and threw it at her. $2,000, I said. Take it and go. She just sat there, staring at it, her fingers trembling. Alex, please. No, I snapped. I don't care. About you. About him. About this mess you made. You wanted this life? You got it. But I'm not going to be the one to clean it up. She tried to say something else, but I was done listening. I walked to the door, opened it, and waited. She picked up the envelope slowly, looked at me like she wanted to say something else, then stood up. She took Emmy's hand, hesitated for one last moment, and then walked out. I didn't watch them leave. I slammed the door, locked it, and sat down in silence. The next morning, I called my dad. I didn't even let him speak. You gave her my address. Silence. Then a sigh. She was desperate, son. I hung up. Then I blocked his number. I had cut off my mother years ago for taking Nick's side, and now my dad had forced my hand. He had betrayed me, just like the rest of them. I had no family left, and I was fine with that. A few days later, I did one last thing. I found Nick. Took me all of 10 minutes. He was living in some shitty apartment in another state, dating a woman half his age. He had completely abandoned them, just like I knew he would. I sent Sarah the address with one last message. File for divorce. Get the alimony. Then leave me the fuck alone. She didn't reply. And for the first time in 6 years, I finally felt free.